Hello, I'm Sharon Ferris, the Director of Marketing at CEREC. On behalf of CEREC, I'd like to welcome you to the webinar. Today's webinar is the fourth in a series of 5 webinars this week, where we'll be exploring impressive career service models at universities and colleges across Canada. For the next hour, we are delighted to have Dr. Peter Dici and a panel of career service leaders discussing the theme of innovation. Before we begin, first a couple of quick housekeeping notes. If during today's webinar you have any questions, please enter them in the chat box that you see on your screen. We'll be leaving time for questions at the end, and if you'd like to direct your question to any particular panelist, just be sure to note that. Then on Friday, we will email you copies of all the slides as well as all the recordings from each of the 5 webinars. We also encourage you to engage with this webinar on social media, and you'll see the Twitter hashtags and handles that you can use now on your screen. Now it is my great pleasure to introduce you to our presenters for today. First, we have Peter, who is the Emeritus Davis Chair in Community College Leadership at the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education at the University of Toronto, and he is the one who has conducted the impressive career service model research that you're going to be hearing about all this week. And our panelists for today who represent those impressive models are Kathy Keats, the Director of Career Services at Queen's University, Andre Raymond, the Director of Career Services at Laval University, and Laurie Edwards, who is the Manager of Student Advisors at Nova Scotia Community College. So welcome to all of you. Thank you for joining us. And now I will turn it over to Peter.
Thanks, Sharon. Okay, thanks, Sharon, and good day, everyone. Today we're focusing on the third theme drawn from our interviews with career services staff in colleges and universities across Canada. And the theme is innovation, or creating new approaches to career delivery. Yesterday we talked about intervention, so that was what people were doing and how they were doing it. So today we're looking at new ventures into creating different kinds of service delivery models. The outline of the session basically is I'll introduce the theme very quickly. Then panelists will introduce themselves and say a little bit about the theme for today. And then we'll do a fireside chat, which is 3 to 5 questions posed to the panelists for comment. And then in the last 10 minutes, we'll end with a question and answer period. For those who were with us yesterday, I showed this slide with the online survey results. And this is basically the information we gathered from the directors of career services in 67 institutions across Canada. And we asked them about what had happened in the last 5 years and then what they thought might happen in the next 5 years in terms of resources. And as you can see in the future perspective, that with regards to the various aspects of resources, whether it be budget, staffing, space, or the number of services, the vast majority of respondents said they didn't perceive that there would be any significant change in the area of budget, staffing, or space, but the vast majority, 3 out of 4, said that they felt that the number of services they were going to deliver was going to increase dramatically. So we basically, as another part of the survey, asked people, what do you think your best practices are? And we ended up with 98 submissions, which were basically text submissions, and we did a thematic analysis of the various pieces of text and extracted these categories of best practice, which talked about the kinds of things that they were working toward. One was collaboration, which has been a theme. That was our theme for the first day on Tuesday, and is pervasive from all the information that we gathered, whether it be through the survey or through the interviews, the on-site interviews. And so with regard to the collaboration, there was a whole cluster of best practices. The most common best practice that was cited about working with faculty. And some people talked about collaboration with the academic side of the house as being the holy grail in terms of trying to get the word out about student career development. But it also involved sometimes working together with counseling co-op and advisory committees, for example, which tended to dominate in terms of the people that career services collaborated with. It tended to be the counseling, the co-op, and academic advisory committees. Group intervention, so moving towards groups as opposed to one-on-one was another theme that came out. Other kinds of one-on-one practices, different ways of doing the one-on-one, the on-campus kind of service delivery. And then online resources, development of portals, e-learning modules was again another best practice that folks cited. And we sort of saw this as being the way people were going to have to go in terms of increasing the number of services offered. If you're not going to have an increase in resources, then you have to be able to do stuff with a minimum of resource overhead. Finally, external collaboration, working with entities outside of the institution, such as employers. So that was basically what we saw in terms of best practices and the kinds of things that people were working on, trying to move toward in terms of innovation around service delivery. So I would now pass it over to the panelists, beginning with Kathy Keats, for them to introduce themselves and to say a little bit about the innovation theme. Kathy?
Great, thank you, Peter, and hello, everyone. So I'm the Director of Career Services at Queen's University here in Kingston, Ontario, which is a small city in Eastern Ontario. Queen's is a school with about 22,000 students who are in undergraduate, graduate, and professional programs. I've been here for about 6 years, but have been working in university career centers for about 18. So here at Queen's, our career services is the central career services supporting all students across the institution at all levels of education. There are some other career supports on campus that are targeted to students in business, law, and education, and we collaborate with those, but we all report separately. We report into the Central Division of Student Affairs. Our office covers career development. We also cover experiential learning in terms of having a central hub for experiential learning at the university and co-leading both 2 academic internship programs as well as on-campus work programs that we, as I say, co-lead and partner with our academic partners and with other student affairs units. Queen's is a very residential campus, and it's also a campus where students are highly engaged and involved in activities here at the university and in the community. And the university itself is very committed to our student experience, and experiential learning and career development are key conversations that are really happening here. In terms of innovation, I've been, I'm really looking forward to this panel because I've been thinking a lot about innovation as both big I innovation and large projects that we have delivered that I think were quite innovative, and also the small I innovation of the things that we do ongoingly around quality improvement and just how we deliver on our mandate and commitment to students. So I have some things to share about that from our team, and I'm really looking forward to things from the other panelists too.
Thanks, Kathy. Raymond?
Hello, my name is André Raymond. I am the director of the Career Center here at Laval University. In fact, we call it the Service de Placement. It's a francophone environment, and it's quite different here in the province of Quebec than in the rest of the country. We have 48,000 students and 50 employees here at our Career Center. Some activities are centralized at our headquarters here, and we have 7 local offices in different faculties. And with some of them, we are taking care of the internship program. For the past 10 years, our Career Center has been very active in the innovation field. Let me give you some example. We have developed an online tool named the Webfolio. That tool is now used by nearly 200 organizations in the province of Quebec, and it has been developed by the team here. And it is used by school boards and college here in the province of Quebec. We created our own database management tool, including a client relationship management system. So our database management tool is like Orbis or Simplicity, but we have developed our own. We offer an online resume bank to our employers. Students can now download an app for their smartphone. And in addition, we also have developed what we call some social innovation. For example, due to an employer demand, we adapt our mentorship program to help the company in the integration process of their new employees. So we are very active in the innovation field here at Quebec City.
Thanks very much, Andre. Laurie?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Laurie Edwards, and I'm with the Nova Scotia Community College. I'm the manager for Advising Career and Inclusion Services. Lots of change. As you know, in our field, change is constant. So when we started this project, I was solely focused on career and counseling services, and now have moved into the area of my staff providing supports for our African Canadian students and our Indigenous students across the system. Lots, in terms of the background to my work, before I get into explaining the model here at NSCC, I think I've really benefited from, and this will probably out me in terms of my age, but having benefited from the old HRDC model of employment counseling training. And so that's where I started, was as an employment counselor with HRDC. And then had the blessing of moving to the province of Nova Scotia, and first as a career practitioner and then managing a career services operation. And then about 16 years ago, moving to the Nova Scotia Community College, at which time started to bringing that career service to the college. The focus for us when I joined the college was bringing that idea that our work was more around the prospective students than it was around the exiting students. So my staff and I developed a model where we were working with community groups and organizations, getting referrals from the government agencies, and kind of providing a Cadillac career counseling service. Over time, that has morphed a little bit, and very excited to say 2 years ago, our unit became part of an integrated student services model. And within that integration, the opportunity for the career development specialists and the career counselors to be integrated with the other advisors, the retention specialists, and so on. So we moved away from a multidisciplinary approach to an integrated approach, which then allowed me access to probably another 30 people with which I'm now working to do some upskilling in terms of career advising. So wonderful opportunity, because we have 10,800 students in seats. We know we have an outreach to 25,000 students annually, and that each year we have approximately 17,000 students applying for a seat at NSCC. So my challenge 2 or 3 years ago was, how do we provide some form of career service for prospective students with such a high number and so few staff? So the innovation theme really rings well with me, and so that was the launch of our Career and Gear online tool, supported with the online chat as well as an email service. So hopefully I'll have a little bit more time later on in some of the questions to describe the experiences related to that.
Thanks very much, Laurie. So it's clear that innovation is alive and well at Queen's, Laval, and NSCC. So the first question that I want to pose to these experts in the area of innovation is, what are effective strategies for building a culture of innovation in career services? So I'll ask, Kathy.
Great, thank you. So I think there are 3 key things that I think about in terms of culture of innovation. And the first is that a precondition in my mind for innovation is actually ensuring that we have the capacity to even think about doing something new and different. Because I think I said before, like, there's big I innovation, small I innovation. Small I innovations are the things we're doing all the time in terms of a culture of just quality improvement, which this team really has. But in terms of innovations that are going to be game changers and have cross-campus scope and impact, that requires a lot of space to think and plan well. And then the second precondition, of course, is having a team that's really up for that and is creative and engaged and connected. So those are the couple of preconditions. I also think in the culture, it's, where do the ideas come from in terms of strategies for what will be the innovations that we want to take on. One of those, which is like what we're doing today, and we were talking about before we got started a bit too, around the sort of network that is so strong amongst career centers and career development practitioners within Canada and beyond Canada. So one of our biggest innovations was really the major maps that we launched 3 years ago. This was an idea where we did not actually have the original idea. We always give credit to Georgia State University for first coming up with the concept of a major map. And I'm guessing many of you have heard about it, but for those who haven't, what it is an integrated tool that helps students think from year 1, 2, 3, 4, what are the things they can be doing to intentionally be taking care of their academics, building experience and skills through experiential learning, getting involved in the community, thinking globally and internationalizing their experience, as well as some concrete career steps. And so we took that idea, that was an idea at Georgia State, and we ran with it. And so we created 40 of them, one for each of our direct entry undergraduate programs. That went so well with over 50,000 hits in the first year that then we worked with our School of Graduate Studies and have created 72 for our master's and doctoral programs. And so, so the strategy behind that and finding the idea was staying connected with what's happening else in the field. That's an idea that someone's had that then we see the potential that we could take that here and really use it. And then the other way of coming up with new ideas is, of course, ideas that we generate here ourselves. And so an example of that would be the It All Adds Up campaign, the career wellness campaign. And so that idea happened right at that table I can see over here in my office with a meeting of our 2 new student leaders of our undergraduate student government, one of our career counselors, and I was at that meeting too, where we were talking about, what goals did those student leaders have for the year around career supports for students. And they said, our students are highly engaged, busy, doing all kinds of great things. We don't want to give them another thing they have to do and feel guilty about not doing if they couldn't get to it. What we'd really like to impact is their sense that what they're doing is important and it's adding up, right? And we went, whoa, it all adds up. And then from that idea, created that campaign, which I might speak about a bit more later. So that's like where to have the ideas. That's a part of that culture of innovation. And then the other part for me is that it's actually mostly about implementation. Idea generation and innovation, in my experience, is possibly the smallest part of innovation, and that implementation and decision making are the bigger parts. So I've mentioned I have a very creative team who stays in touch with what's going on across Canada and beyond. We have no shortage of great ideas, and that what we've tried to create in our, we actually tend to not use the word innovation here. We just talk about quality improvement in those ideas, and then really that prioritizing of those great ideas. What are the ones that will have the greatest impact, are the best use of resources, and we have the capacity to do at this time. So I think those are the bits and pieces of our, not just culture of innovation, but even just our whole office culture in terms of how we operate and find new ideas and then make decisions about what to follow through on.
That's terrific. Thanks, Kathy. Andre.
In addition of what Kathy said, I mean, it starts from the management style. If you want innovation in your group, you have to give employees some free times to think about their practice. If their agenda is full of appointment with clients, meeting, and administrative requirements, if they are always in a rush, it's going to be difficult for them to innovate. They will not have time to read. They will not have time to observe some change in their practice and why those changes are happening. So first, be sure that your team member have time to think. Be sure that this time also allow you to think about their practice is useful. Create task group and give them some analysis to do and some problem to solve. You have to put your people in action. Give them resources, time, money, human resources to work on the solution. Give them some project management notion, timeline, measurable objective, and charter of responsibilities. Help them in the implementation of the solution. For example, one of our counselors was working on a project, and we give him some training in project management. Finally, give them some feedback and celebrate success. In addition to that, here at Laval University, we are very lucky to have our own IT support team. So we have two analysts here in our office, and it's important in order to retrieve data on the system and also to develop tools helping efficiency in the existing systems. It saves a lot of time and it's more efficient. So if you can push on your management and try to have at least some IT resource in your team, that will be helpful.
Merci, André. Lori?
Yeah, gosh, Andre, as you were speaking, I was thinking about my own dean and all of those things that she, as well as the vice president, did for myself and our team as we created the Career in Gear. So all of those elements were certainly a big part of our building towards such an innovative product such as that interactive website. But it also started with a few of us here, and there's something that I've always believed in as we move towards this notion of innovation. And what is it? Is that it really begins with a creative process. And so how do you encourage those in creative juices, and how do you get people to move beyond the kind of traditional in the box thinking and say, what if this were possible? Using an appreciative inquiry approach and and discovery and looking at all of the things that are out there and what is it that you do and how can you either improve upon it, make it different or better, or expand its reach. And I think a lot of this came from a challenge that our president and our board of governors for NSCC and our government of Nova Scotia really concerned that they wanted more people to consider NSCC in terms of what a good fit was. And so that was a challenging thing. How do we create a tool, a resource, or a service that helps people determine good fit? So I think it came from a creative process and enterprise thinking, and having our management team really encourage that sort of thing. The other part of it is, for me, is being able to tell that compelling story, either using the data or being able to answer that question, why? What are the stories that we're hearing from our prospective students and our current students about why they're coming and what are the challenges that they faced, and then how to capsulize them to give it back. So how do we address those stories? And really, why is this work important? I recall 2 years ago when CEREC launched the Career Development Matters. Why does career development matters? And that was sort of my mantra that I started to use when I went into any central team meetings, to campus-based meetings, to our senior leader meetings, is giving that compelling story about why career development matters. Getting the commitment from the different echelons. And so when you launch an interactive tool that takes a service that's been in person, and you're saying, okay, now we're going to take what we do in person and we're going to put it on the web, and we're going to create this type of rich experience. Well, that's good. Change is going to cause some fear, or we can't do it this way. So we had to start small to show people how a tool such as this could actually benefit their practice, expand their practice, but most importantly, help our students or our prospective students get into the process of looking towards their future without first having that sort of one-to-one group session or one-to-one meeting with a career development specialist. Again, a lot of the work that we did in terms of the innovation for career services is tying all of this work, completing the compelling story, but we're really tying into the values and the mission of the college. And I think that if we were successful in anything, we did talk about good fit, the economic success of all Nova Scotians. And I think that really helped sell the case to say why we should embark on having this interactive website. And to Kathy's point, is celebrating the innovation at the end of it. So as we moved through that whole project team and developed it, we tested it, we started to develop the data, the analytics around it, but also bringing our team back together to celebrate what we've been able to do, and from there move into marketing it. A final thing around effective strategies, it moves from me to we, and you'll hear that, the Kilberger group and so on, that it really is something that it's around collaboration, going back to your first webinar, that no one person can move innovation. It's the compelling story, bringing a team together, getting the commitment, using the analytics, and moving forward. Thanks.
Thanks, Laurie. So it seems that, I mean, based on the comments from the three panelists, that really giving your staff, as Andreas mentioned, giving your staff some time to think and be creative. And I think Kathy mentioned that as well, bringing people together around a table to come up with some new ideas. And the other part of it, I think that was sort of a common comment, was this notion of, you know, the real difficult part is the implementation part. It's nice to come up with the ideas, but in terms of implementation, sometimes that can be quite difficult. So I just drew one slide from the survey results and the commitment of senior admin. And I think Laurie mentioned the notion of deans and VP support. And when we asked the directors of career services what they thought the level of support was from their senior admin, these are the results. 45% said very or quite committed, 35% somewhat committed, and 18% not at all. So as I said on Monday, my thought was 45% is not bad, but that's less than half are very and quite committed. Now, you know, as other people had mentioned in the interviews that we made, senior admin tend to be very focused on budget, those kinds of things, working with government committees and policy levels sort of thing. So not necessarily, you know, engaged in the weeds of the day-to-day detail. But that said, I think given the current labor market and the whole discussion in the media around employment of graduates in the labor market or the lack thereof, that I would think that senior admin would be more in tune. But anyway, it seems to be certainly a prerequisite for moving initiatives forward, innovation forward. So I guess the next question to the panel, and I'll ask Andre to respond to this first, is how do you get administrative buy-in for new approaches?
First of all, it's very important to align your development on the business plan of the organization. For example, here at Laval University, I'm very involved in the strategic planification of the new director group at Laval University, and it's very important to be aligned on what they want, if you want that they listen you after. When you want to have a new approach, you have to explain clearly what do you want to use, why do you want to use this new approach, and what problem cannot be solved by the old approach. Try to figure out the return on investment of this new approach. How do you gonna measure the result? Because at the end, if it's your job to find the common interest between that you want to achieve and the benefit of the rest of the organization. It's important to get the input of the employees during the evolution of the project, where they can give their input and experience. They will be the end user of the new project. They have to involve during the process. That's what I have to say about the how you get administrative buy-in.
Super, thanks, Andre. How about Kathy?
Great, thank you. I have to say, going back to the last slide, I'm one of the fortunate in the 45% where senior leaders are very committed to this. And so that's a good place to start. And I guess in thinking about buy-in, the first place my mind goes to is, I really hope that I never have to have conversations where I've just met someone and the first conversation is, I'd really like to tell you about this big, risky new idea I have and convince you to do this. It's far easier to have that conversation after you have a trusted relationship with that person, that they already see you and your unit as a place that is credible and reliable and delivers, and they've seen that evidence of delivery before. So then there's that trust and openness, because I think decision making is partly logical, but there's actually quite a bit of emotional subjectiveness to decision making as well. The other piece I would add to that is, and this is really picking up on, I think it was Christine earlier in the week in the collaboration webinar mentioned the importance of listening. So ideally in those previous conversations, and I think Andre's mentioning this too, right, is understanding their needs. You know, the macro needs of the institution, absolutely, and the strategic priorities, but as much as possible, understanding that individual's needs and pressure points so that when you're presenting this idea and innovation to them, you can start with here are the things I've heard you say over the last while, that A, B and C have been challenges or things that you'd like to solve or things that have been causing pain points in your area. And here's a possible solution. And, and then all those other things that Andre mentioned around the evidence as to why you think this would be successful, it's been successful somewhere else, or projecting the return on investment of that. But the key things to me around administrative buy-in are back to collaboration, relationship building, and really understanding all your partners and senior leaders' immediate and long-term needs.
Super, Kathy. Thanks very much. Laurie.
Oh, yeah, and I was just experiencing some technical difficulty there, so I apologize if it blurred the images or the sound there. Yeah, I'm going to just come back to what I said in terms of the innovation, connecting with the strategic brand, the academic plan of the institution, really connecting dots for people, because often career conversations don't happen at those higher levels about why career development matters. And so every opportunity, having both our career advisors and our career counselors, having those conversations with the campus management teams and straight with faculty and straight through the organization, and really being able to connect the dots with the brand and being able to demonstrate that. As well as, not only are we here to help students acquire their preferred future and set themselves on their path, but we're talking about bigger pictures of active engagement and citizenship. And I think administration appreciates those messages, because we are an economic building block of the province of Nova Scotia, and probably colleges like that right across the country. That administration does see this as a really important element of their service, not just for our current students, but to the communities in which they're located.
Fantastic. Thanks, Laurie. Interesting dialogue there, because it really does replicate, I guess not surprisingly, really, because these folks are all at the impressive institutions, what we heard and when we did the interviews around how to implement an impressive model. And a lot of it was around tying what you're doing to the strategic plan or the brand of the institution, so that the folks that are at the higher levels within the institution can see a convergence between the efforts of the Career Services Department and the overall institution. The notion of evidence, I think Andre mentioned that, and so did Kathy, is being able to provide the data. And certainly if anybody's talked to Jan Basso from Wilfrid Laurier or Tony Botello from SFU, that's what they will talk about in a big way, that having the evidence, having the data to show that here are the outcomes. Again, I guess as Andre was mentioning earlier, here are the outcomes, here is what's happening as a result of these efforts, and we would like to move, steps forward with a new innovation, and having that evidence to show really goes a long way to helping the senior management sort of get the buy-in. So, and that sort of brings us to the next question, which is the notion of how do you implement a best practice. So when we looked at the results that are contained within the two reports from this particular project, really the reports articulate what the characteristics of an impressive model are, and there were 4 from the survey, and then when we combined the interview data, we ended up with 7 characteristics of impressive career service models. One of the things that folks said, though, in addition to saying, "Oh, here's the kinds of things that we do that we found to be effective in promoting an impressive model," there were some who cautioned to say, don't just sort of take this and try to transplant it unless it fits with your institution. So there's not a formula. You have to know your own institution, know your culture, know your staff, what the strengths of your staff and the weaknesses of your staff are. And then you begin to customize, if you will, the key features of the model that we see that's come out of the data. So, we do have, these 7 characteristics that sort of are a bit of a recipe for how to create an impressive career services model on your campus. But how do we look at trying to take those into a particular institution? So there may be institutions out there thinking like, okay, here's 7 things that I can work toward. How do you adapt them, though, to the local context? So I'm going to start with Lori this time, if you will.
Great. And I guess the key to that question is adapt. There's nothing new under the sun. Each one of us comes to an idea because someone else has put something out there, and we've decided, gee, that resonates with myself, that resonates with my organization. So how can I take that idea or that practice or that innovation at this particular post-secondary and bring it to my institution? And how do I create what the local feel is around that? I think it's listening to the stories, asking good questions of whoever the originator of that best practice is, determining what their budget is, what challenges, concerns that they had, but also where the high points were for them. And if they had a chance to do it all over again, what are some of the things that they would pursue? The other part in terms of the local context, they're great ideas that can work extremely well in highly urbanized areas, and there's high competition for particular students. And then you come to perhaps an area where most of your students are commuter students, they're rural based, and it's what can we do to provide an equitable service to all? And then I think that type of questioning can take whatever that best practice was from another institution and say, okay, and this is how we can start to think about doing it in our environment. It is challenging, but the key to all of that is listening to that story from the other institution, building on what you can bring to it and the gifts and talents and the infrastructure that your institution has, and then being able to take that creative process and design something that suits your student population.
Oh, fantastic, Lori. Kathy, would you want to add to that?
Sure. I think I'll use a couple examples, but I'll start by saying that, the first thing for me is actually I need to know my local context. And I don't mean to say that in a glib way, but actually there's the context inside of my office and what we understand that we believe about what we understand about student needs and how what will work and what will work here, but our context is very complex with many different stakeholders at the institution. And so we in the Career Center need to try to understand those other stakeholders as much as possible, but also I always remind myself that as much as I try to understand them, I will never understand them and their context and what they know as well as they do themselves. So how to include them in the planning and in the adaptation to the local context. So two quick examples. One is with the Major Maps project. That was very collaborative. So as I mentioned before, we spoke to the originators at Georgia State and said, we'd like to take this idea and run with it here. They were happy with that. So how we did that was really trying to include the stakeholders and users from the very beginning of adapting it to our environment here. So a project team that included an academic advisor and a couple of students on the project team that saw the entire project through. We worked with one department that did a full prototype and worked very closely in understanding this from a academic department perspective. Then that prototype went through user testing with students, and we tried to ensure we had a cross-section of students involved in that. That prototype and the whole project, then we went through consultations with multiple academic units, student service units, our central communications unit, and every one of those steps revealed things to us that we wouldn't have understood ourselves about that context and made it a far better project in the end. So that's the one example. The other example is It All Adds Up again, which we created here on our campus, and it really came out of the unique characteristics of the community here and how engaged students are, and that residential rather than, as Lori said, commuter campus. Those things really impact what students are doing, how they're doing them, what they choose to do. And we were concerned our students are so engaged that they're so engaged, but they are not creating the time to stop and reflect and feel good about all the things they're doing and be able to identify how that is moving them forward. And we did that really successfully on our campus. And then talking to directors at the other Ontario universities, they recognized, this is a message that could resonate there. And last year we had 43 career centers across Canada participate in It All Adds Up. But what I thought was amazing was every single office did it in their own way, right? So I think we kind of accidentally hit on maybe a core message that was universal, the notion of it all adds up. But then, you know, where a particular center wanted to deliver that, with which student groups, in what ways, and changing some of the visuals and changing the exercises was a really excellent example, I think, of adapting something to a multitude of local contexts.
Oh, fantastic. I think you're a great example. Andre.
Like Kathy said, you have to understand your local context very well. That's very important. But you also have to talk about best practices with your team before starting to change your actual practice and try to figure out the fit in your context. For example, here at Laval University, twice a month we have a meeting with all of the members of our counselor team, and we are talking about what are the best practices and how it can fit in our context. So we talk about it before. After, you have to involve the member of your team in the change to come and let them adapt these best practices to your local realities, and it will help. It's necessary also to get the input from the students in order to improve quality of the tool and services.
Okay, let's see, Andre. Great stuff. So again, it really does, the comments sort of parallel some of the things that we heard in the interviews around the notion of having staff on board. So it's one thing to develop a strategic plan, but it's another to have everybody to buy into that strategic plan. And if you want to begin something new, then all staff have to be on board. And as one institution said, sometimes that requires some retirements to happen to get all staff on board. So it's about that. The other part of innovation, we asked people, what are your best practices? And then we said, okay, what, not so much. So what kinds of things did people try, but didn't in the end work out? And we had 14 descriptions of initiatives that were tried but discontinued. And the majority involved workshops, sort of after school or at some point during the day, putting on various kinds of workshops, but they typically failed because they didn't attract sufficient enrollment. And the folks basically said student timetables, the commuter institution, which Laurie talked about, those kinds of things are classic in terms of really being blockages for students participating in various new initiatives that are tried on campus. So then the next question would be, what kinds of strategies can be used to overcome barriers when a new initiative failed due to lack of attendance? Andre.
First, prior to the initiative, always prepare a way to evaluate it. At least you will be able to collect data and get some information. Isolate the positive, even if it didn't work. What worked? You will learn something useful to you for your next initiative. Explain it as it is and try to understand what happened. If it didn't work, say it didn't work and try to understand why and what we learned from that and what we can retain to move on. Be honest on what went good and wrong. Evaluate and notice the way to improve. Let's give the chance to improve the system and method, and at the end you will find your own good in French we call it recette. Your
recipe.
Good cooking stuff at the end.
The recipe, yes.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see, Kathy.
Sure, thank you. So actually, not to be glib, but I actually am having us try to not do things that might fail due to lack of attendance at all, because we are trying to not do independent things. We spend a lot of time in promoting things and communicating to students, and some of that's always going to be important to do that. But as much as possible, if we can go where students already are, attendance actually then isn't an issue. And one of my mantras is that career is important but not urgent. So every student says to me, like, yeah, career is really important. I'm thinking about it all the time. I'm worried about it. But what's urgent is that essay that's due tomorrow, or my team meeting, or this club that I've committed to. And so while I know in our office, we come up with lots of ideas for things that would be really great, like great workshops and excellent topics to do, but they're not the kind of things that are easy for students to make urgent. Right? And so we've tried to pull back on the number of things that we do that require promotions and people to fit them in, and redirect those resources to things that are embedded in where students already are. So that's one strategy. I think to really answer the question better though, like if something fails due to lack of attendance, I think a strategy that we've tried where we are doing something that requires students to make that effort and stick it into their already busy schedules would be doing things that are in partnership with others, where the partners have access to that student group, and it's really they're motivated to deliver, in addition to us motivated to get it out there, that partner is motivated to deliver the student attendance. And in fact, ideally, it's the students themselves who are partnering with us on it and feel ownership of the event. So they're coming because they have a sense of ownership that the initiative succeeds for them as well as for us.
Oh, great ideas, Kathy. Thanks. Lori?
Yeah, same as Andre and Kathy. One of the things that this question percolated with me was around how often we're not given enough time to prove success. And a lot of the work that we do is meaningful. And I often talk about it takes time to create a reputation. So I ask to be given that amount of time versus, well, we ran this workshop and twice and we didn't have anyone show up for it. Well, what happens if we get 2 people the next time and then start to grow it from there? The other part is the language that we use to describe our work. And oftentimes it's not tied to what the students believe that they need at this moment. Wonderful success during our transition in programming this year at NSCC is we changed the name away from the word workshop to the use of the word pop-up. And we hosted pop-ups down in the Learning Commons and in the central areas. So we went from sessions that had 1 or 2 people attending them to, over that week of orientation, each day it grew, so that as the students were coming through orientation and starting to realize that there was more to this than just showing up to a class, and there was a pop-up just in time for them at the lunch hour, not when classes were planned. So it's kind of going back and looking at what the student life cycle is like, when we can fit ourselves into the day of a post-secondary institution. The other thing, embedding our services in existing programs. So how do we get invited into the classroom? How do we contribute to the work integrated learning conversations? And a couple of years ago, one of the things that oftentimes you want to do when talking about transitioning out students is doing the handshake workshop. So career services can run a handshake workshop, but gee, if IBM is coming in to help us run the handshake workshop, you go from 5 people attending to probably 50 people in the room all at one time. So like Kathy said, it's who are our external partners that we can bring in. We know these are good messages. We know these are good skills for our learners to acquire, but sometimes it takes the external groups, our employers, to help us with some of the messaging and to build up the attendance at our sessions.
Fantastic. Thanks, Lori. So going where the students are and building in the partnerships so that the partners bring out the students. I think we have time for the one last question, which is around building buy-in, and we talked to the various people who said, you have to have buy-in from the top. We've talked about that. So once you develop a new strategy, and I think Kathy was talking about starting small and then growing it. So what are the effective strategies for scaling innovations throughout the institution? Kathy, can you begin with that one?
Yeah, I think if at all possible, actually start planning at the scale of the whole institution. So right from the beginning of thinking about a project, think, could this be institutional wide? And more, we're trying to focus on doing things that are institution wide, because if we start, sometimes then we launch it small and grow it over time. But thinking about the scale from the beginning can impact the way we create that small start, so that we do it in a way that actually could be scaled. So we think about the most efficient and effective ways of doing it. For example, with the Major Map project, we also thought, like, how can we create a prototype and a template that's as easy as possible for every department to use, and actually minimize the flexibility and adaptability to each area too, so that as you're scaling it out, there are so many consistent things, and then there are appropriate places for targeting, and adapting to it. But those are limited, because if everyone was really creating their own more from scratch or had a lot of opportunities to change things, the time that it would take to do that, and also it would be harder for students to read when they look significantly different. And the other thing that this is just not within the institution but beyond is the It All Adds Up campaign. The reason we were able to share that across the country is we created a plug and play toolkit. Right? So we said, here's what worked on our campus, here's what we've learned from a few other campuses, use it and adapt it. And that meant that rather than having 43 schools asking some of the same questions as they were starting with something, we were able to create something that I think was fairly easy for people to use. And we're trying to do that with some of our projects on campus now too, like creating resources that are like, an instructor can use this, a supervisor can use this, and just, we keep using this term plug and play, so it's scalable.
Terrific. Thanks, Kathy. Laurie.
It's always interesting to figure out what it is that you're doing. And for me at NSCC, we have 13 campuses and 3 learning sites. So how do we take that good idea and that innovation and ensure that staff have the skills and competencies to deliver the service, to the resources and tools available to them at the campus, and that we're meeting a need of the students or our prospective students. So a lot of that starts with understanding your audience, doing some focus groups, starting to do some assessment and gathering the data to actually be able to take what the one good idea is and then say, how do we ensure that it's not equal but equitable across this whole system? And I think that's an important conversation to start with. None of this work can be done without collaboration in our partners and as well as our specialists. So, having this opportunity with our team, we have our career development reference group who are absolute specialists in career development, be it career advising and career counseling. And then I have specialists that are actual career counselors and personal counselors. And then beyond that, influencing a whole community of practice out there. So we have champions in faculty and academic chairs and in deans who believe in this and are willing to have that conversation. Well, how do we take this one good idea and bring it to each of the campuses? So a lot of it depends on nurturing those relationships and building having the conversations and building the expertise of our people at each of the campuses. Training, professional development, the development of that community of practice, I think helps us take one good idea and spread it across an institution as large as NSCC.
Okay, great. Thanks, Laurie. Andre.
I think it's our job to explain to all stakeholders on the campus that career integration should be a sharing responsibility for everybody. It's give you some power when everybody understands that we all have a role to play, and it's easier after to export what you are doing in faculties. And you have to explain the anticipated impact benefits in the institution, evaluate it after a few months and after 1-2 years in order to know if it's still relevant, and give the information to faculties. And you have to work on a team with every stakeholder on the campus.
Right. Okay, so great stuff. We're all back to this collaboration, the team approach. That was the last question, so I'm going to pass it over to Sharon again for questions from the audience.
Fantastic, thank you. We do have a couple of questions. The first one is from Bill, and it's a big one. He said, Laurie, you spoke of being out of the box innovative. Have existing restraints such as money, people, existing systems, politics created a limitation on the kinds of innovations that you're able to demonstrate and implement?
You know what, I'm a type of person that always tries to see the silver lining. So if someone says, here's the barrier or here's the constraint, it's now how can I bring the team together to figure out how we can address that barrier or that constraint. So out of the box thinking, and then doing your research and homework, and then bring in the language that you know is going to be received well, is probably the best way. And that you can, use the politicians' language. If career development matters and we want Nova Scotians employed, then let's have that conversation. If filling our seats with students who are able to maintain themselves, persist, and then graduate, then career development matters. So each time you can see the nuance of that changing and say, and here's the tool to do it, and here's the resource to do it, and providing the evidence. But I do rely on my allies to calm me down when I get really excited about a great idea and I start exercising that creative side, and then I access those people that can help me develop the data or use the data to help make sense of why that particular innovation will work.
All right, terrific. A question now from Tracy. First, a comment from her who says, fantastic webinar, that she really appreciates the different perspectives that are being presented. And she said what she'd like to see are more online initiatives aimed at targeted audiences within the population. Any comments from our panelists on related experience?
Not quite sure what you mean by targeted audiences. So are we talking about a specific cultural group or at a specific stage of the student life cycle and so on? I think these days of online tools, it just depends on, is it a web-based tool, or are you doing something for a group of students to D2L? And there's certain, for using cultural references, embracing career development, such as guiding circles and other types of models, bringing cultural influences in through our elders for our Indigenous students, are all ways of how do we get that voice in that in a web presence or in our tools online. It's again, that's out of the box thinking. And just remembering you have so many different audiences. So how do you create that tool that is accessible to all?
And Tracy just commented, yes, that included all the aspects she was thinking of. So thank you. A question from Carol for Kathy, who is looking for more information on both major maps and It All Adds Up. Where can she find that?
Right. I think the easiest is if you Google Queen's University major maps, you'll go right to the site and they're all available online. And It All Adds Up actually has a website too. And I think it's just italladdsup.ca. And that is the website for the whole national campaign where all of the participants are represented there.
And maybe time for a quick final question, and that's about high schools. High schools in Alberta are using text messages to relay key information to students regarding educational and career inquiries, and they're seeing some success. And this person would like to know if any universities are using text messaging.
I'll say our office isn't. I couldn't speak for whether other parts of the university are using text messaging, but we are not right now usually communicating with students that way. Yeah.
Oh. The only place that I saw it in action was actually in South Africa, where there's not a lot of kiosks and computers available. That a lot of the career development, career information in particular through the South African government was actually being delivered through that text message service, but it linked you back to a main office for a telephone conversation or in person.
Yes, you can give some specific information about with text, but it's very difficult to work with clients only on text.
All right, and with that, Peter, I'll ask you if you have any closing remarks.
Just to say thank you to our three panelists who've done a fantastic job, as always, with handling these 5 questions. Great ideas that are consistent with what we've heard in all the other interviews. So this is, I think, food for thought for sure. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Terrific. And
thank you.
Let me add my thanks, Kathy, Andre, Laurie, as well as Peter. As mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, we will email you the links to the slides and recordings of all the webinars after the conclusion of the series tomorrow. And also after the final installment, we will be sending you out a short evaluation form, and we would appreciate you taking a few minutes to fill that out. So we are back tomorrow for our final webinar. The week has gone so quickly. This time we'll be taking a look at the theme of evaluation with the career service leaders at Mount Royal University, Simon Fraser University, and University of Toronto. With that, I wish you a wonderful rest of the day, and we will see you then. Thank you.